Okay, fantastic. All right, guys, welcome. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome to the San Antonio Fabric and Power BI user group. It's great to have you, as well as for those that are returning. Super excited to see y'all back again for another session this month. And just welcome to everybody. Our agenda for today, we're going to do a quick intro for the San Antonio Pug leaders, how to get involved with the group, review this month's, or actually last month's, Fabric updates, as well as Power BI updates. Then we're going to jump into the presentation on DAX from fundamentals to advanced insights, and we'll go to a live demonstration working in Power BI Desktop. And then we'll answer any questions that you may have afterwards, and then any closing comments. All right, our Pug leaders, we have our fearless leader, Lawrence, who is unfortunately not with us today. And then we have Rayanne, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Ryan. I'm data enthusiasm. I work as a data analysis, data scientist, and as a machine learning. And I like working with data, whatever is the background. Yeah, that's about me.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. And then,
by the way, I want to mention something about we're starting, we try to activate women in data chapter in San Antonio. So if you are a woman working in the data in San Antonio, follow us in Women in Data. It's a nonprofit organization to support women in the data domain. And please Google it and join our chapter.
And Ryan, if you have a link, do you want to drop that in the chat?
Yeah, I will drop a link in the chat.
All right, fantastic. Okay, and then we have Jason and Antonio, who are also a part of our group, and unfortunately they weren't able to make it with us, but you'll hopefully see them next month. They kind of come in and go whenever work allows it. So my name is Chris Allen. I am the GVC. I work for GVEC, or Guadalupe Valley Electric Co-op, and I am the data analytics manager. And I'll also be presenting today. All right, so how do we get involved? Join us with the San Antonio Bug, excuse me, San Antonio user group. We are growing and we want you to be a part of our journey. Below are the different platforms that we are a part of. We have the Meetup group, our LinkedIn group, Microsoft Fabric community, and then we also have a YouTube channel where once we are done recording, we will go ahead and post this session so that you can review it and share it. All right, so a little bit about us and also when do we meet? So this session is really for anyone that has a team or any individual who wants to learn about Power BI in a guided session. So this is really a hands-on grassroots effort. Anyone can join. There is no requirement. And it's really just about helping each other in learning how to use Power BI, how to leverage it, and just how does this thing called Power BI and Fabric work. And also all the different related technologies that you can leverage with it. And when do we meet? Well, we meet every last Wednesday of the month at 12 p.m. So to keep it simple, just last Wednesday, 12 p.m., mark it on the calendar. And then if you want to register for the upcoming sessions, there's a link right here that you can click on for the meetup info. And I'll add this PowerPoint slide into actually a link to the PowerPoint slide deck into the chat so that you can access all the links. Let me pull that up here. And if you can't access it, let me know. Don't go taking a sneak peek at the presentation. I haven't gotten that far yet, so no cheating. All right, moving on. Community impact. So This is a grassroots effort, community-based, and we are looking for potential speakers. So if you're interested in speaking, we do have a link for you to fill out to give us a little bit of information on what you're interested in speaking on and just a little bit of background info on who you are. So if you are interested in speaking, I have dropped the link into the chat. You can fill out that form and then we'll be in touch with you. All right, now based on our survey or our responses from it was about mid last year about what topics were interesting to the community, we have covered so far today, or we have Power BI, we're covering DAX today, we have covered data viz, we have covered Fabric, we have dashboard design on the agenda for some point to be covered this year, as well as event streams and real-time analytics. And we have covered data modeling and transformation. And then we will also hit on data factory, covering flows and pipelines, and then any case studies or demos, and then admin and governance. So those are some of the session topics that we have on deck that are coming in the near future or throughout the year. That's really have one per month, so we got to spread them out. All right, so Fabric updates. Really, this is just a very small snippet of the Fabric updates. There are just so many different updates that are occurring on a regular basis that it takes too long to list them all out. So here's just a couple that stood out. Now, in the link that I sent you for that PowerPoint slide, if you want to go to the Microsoft Fabric blog, you can click on this link right here and it'll take you to it. If you're not a fan of reading and you want to watch the video summary instead, you can click on this link right here. And there's a 7-minute video just recapping all the different updates for you. But here's a couple that stood out. Fabric Conference 2025, it starts next week. It is not too late to register. And they're actually giving you a discount code to have a reduced registration fee. So go ahead and do a research if you're interested in joining. It is in Las Vegas and it was a massive hit last year. So super excited. I'll be there here, going to it here next week, and I can't wait to bring back anything I've learned. Also, there is a 50% discount on the exam DP 700. That is the Fabric Data Engineering Associate Certification. That is a step up from the DP 500, which did replace the DP 300. So they took the engineering in Azure test and added the Fabric component into it. And so now they've got the Fabric Data Engineer Associate Certificate. So if you want, there is a discount code. If you click on here, that's coming directly from Microsoft. And they'll give you the code if you sign up, and then you can register for your test. All right. Moving on, we have Copilot in Power BI mobile apps. This is actually available on iPads and Android tablets. They have more recently added Copilot to mobile phones or mobile apps, but it was not on the iPad or Android tablets, but now it is. Keep in mind that it is still in preview, so that there may still be some bugs that they're working out. And then in addition, you have the updated section of how Copilot arrived at this. This is the spot where when you ask Copilot a question about your report or your data set, it tells you how it got to that answer, provided different links or different information on how that formula was calculated, etc. There's a big request from the community to have more transparency into how it generated those visual answers. And so now that they've actually expanded it so that it gives you that insight and transparency that everyone's been wanting. So that's a big one right there. And in addition, published to web support for Azure Maps. They've been doing a lot of improvements with the Azure Maps, and a lot of the visual interactions have been a very big win, and it really has taken the core map visual and just expanded it into a very dynamic and very similar to ArcGIS type map, if you're familiar with that. So they're continuing to build and expand on that, which is very encouraging. There's a lot of potential there as well. So one of the additions that they've added is that you don't need to take any extra steps to any extra steps to take advantage of the Azure Map visuals and publish to web reports. You just need the embedded code. So previously there were additional steps you had to take, but now they streamlined it similar to if you were to publish a report using the publish to web embedded code. So just be careful to make sure that the publish to web, if you need it private, that you don't use the public publish to web link. So just be careful. And that'll be it. The next and last Fabric update that we're highlighting is the Monitoring Hub enhancements for semantic models. This is actually really cool where if you are in Microsoft, if you're in Power BI service, that Microsoft has added insights into how your data sets are refreshing, your data flows, and a lot of your artifacts. You can filter it by your workspace. You can filter it by when it was last refreshed, if it was a success, a failure, or in progress. Definitely take a look at this because one of the biggest issues was you can only have insights into your workspaces, but not across your tenant. And this allows that to occur if you have the appropriate permissions, which is if you're on the admin level for those workspaces. So that covers Fabric. And now moving on to Power BI, and a lot of those Fabric updates also carry over to Power BI as well. As just like we had in Fabric, if you want the monthly updates listed, this is their blog. If you want to watch the video summary, you can also click here on the link. One of the other updates, or one of the additional updates that they continue to bring out is the conditional formatting. So they're really, or with visual calculations, they're continuing to expand on that, and they have added the conditional formatting support. So now with your visual calculations, you can set up conditional formatting rules for columns and measures on your visuals. And they have talked about, or I've mentioned this before, about live edit for your semantic models in direct lake mode with Power BI Desktop. So that's a really big jump right there with the semantic models, where you can edit those on desktop, which was not previously possible. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and what the response is on that. And then the enhanced modeling performance has also been improved as well. Also, something that really stood out was the maximized data efficiency with the Echo master data write back. And that's what no, that is written back for Power BI. Streamline your data processes and enhance your write back capabilities for smarter business decisions. Now, I don't have too much experience or any experience with Echo master data. This is the first I've heard of it, but the fact that it has write back really piqued my interest. So if anyone does have any experience or any feedback on that, we'd love to hear it. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to chime in and throw it in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to just keep moving on. All right, so we have our topic today, DAX, from fundamentals to advanced insights. So here are the session takeaways for today. Iterators and conditional logic, when to use SUMX versus SUM, switch versus if, and best practices for writing efficient queries. Calculate and time intelligence, how to modify filter context, shift dates dynamically, and work with multiple date fields. And last but not least, disconnected date tables, when inactive relationships won't work, and how to use disconnected tables for better slicing. So we're going to start out with a couple PowerPoint slides to just review what DAX is, some of the different concepts that I feel are the most important that need to be touched on. And then we're going to jump into Power BI Desktop for the live demonstration. The first, what is DAX? DAX, or Data Analysis Expressions, is the formal language that powers data modeling in Power BI. It's a collection of functions, operators, and constants that can be used in a formula or expression to calculate and return one or more values. Stated more simply, DAX helps you create new information from data already in your model. And if you look to the right, there's a picture of a DAX query, and then the output. And we'll get more into that once we're in desktop. We'll actually see that in play here. All right, so why is DAX important to know? This, I think, is one of the biggest hurdles of learning DAX, as far as why take the time to learn it. From past experiences and talking to other analysts that are new, maybe they started out with learning Python or SQL. They're just in that camp of, well, this is just another language to learn. Why do I need to do it? I can do it with my current toolkit. Well, there is a reason that Microsoft has dedicated so much time and many resources to DAX. And with DAX, you can go beyond the basic visualizations and unlock deeper analytics, such as time intelligence, complex filtering, and dynamic calculations, tailored to your business needs. Mastering DAX is essential for transforming raw data into meaningful insights and delivering real value through your Power BI reports.
I have a question. Is
Yes.
DAX the same Excel format that we work with Excel? Is similar or the same?
That's a great question. It's very similar. However, there are additional functions that are not in Excel that Power BI has. So you can do more. So think of Excel kind of as a light version.
So if you are familiar with Excel formulas, your life here is much easier.
Absolutely. Yep. That skill set will carry over, and that learning curve is you're already over it. So now it's just learning what the differences are and how to leverage it using Power BI.
Thank you.
Fantastic question. All right. So where does DAX fit in? Well, in the Power BI workflow, yeah, SQL and Power Query are typically used for data extraction, cleansing, and shaping before the data is loaded into the model. DAX comes into play after the data is loaded, and that's where it's key. That's the important part to keep in mind, that it is on the visual side. Think of it this way. SQL and Power Query get your data ready. DAX turns that data into insights. It's ideal for dynamic on-the-fly calculations that respond to user interactions, slicers, filters, and visuals. So here's some key concepts, and then we're going to jump into Power BI Desktop. Calculated columns versus measures. This is a very common question of when do I create a calculated column versus a measure? Well, that's a more complicated question, but here's a very high level summary. Calculated columns are computed row by row during the data refresh and stored in the model. That's something to keep in mind. You're actually expanding the model and you're making it bigger. You're making your tables wider. And then all those calculations that you have to run row by row, there is compute cost to it. So keep that in mind. Whereas with measures, they're calculated on the fly in response to filters and slicers in your visuals. So those measures are actually calculating based off of what that visual is rendering. So it's a subset of the data set. It's not the whole data set, such as with the calculated columns, it'll actually run that calculation across the whole data set. Row context and filter context. Row context is about working on a single row of data, which is going to be more often than not used in calculated columns. Filter context applies when a visual or a slicer filters data and affects how measures calculate results. And I have more resources at the end to really dig into what the difference is between filter context and row context. And they actually have picture visuals for those that are visual learners. And it really explains the concepts. So I highly recommend check that out if you're not comfortable with knowing what those two concepts are. All right, context
I have a
transition
question
occurs.
about the columns too here.
Yes.
So if I created a column for one table, then I updated this table with another. For example, one of the table for 2024, I updated for another table, similar format, for example, for 2025. Should I go and recreate the column again, or will be automatically moved to the second table?
if you have a 2024 data set and then you have a 2025 data set, same schema, just different years. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. Everything is the same except like it's the updating for the next, the following year.
Yeah, that would just depend on what you're wanting to do. If you want to overwrite that table or if you want to append it, I would recommend appending because then you can compare 24 to 25 and then you can get some of those different trends.
And the column that I created new for the, for example, 2024 will be expanded, or I have to create it again for the 2025?
I would actually rename that column 20 from 24 and change it to year. So that way you have one column for year and then you have your 2024 value versus and your 2025 value.
Thank you.
And that way, yep. Oh, I see we got Tom. You have a hand or a question. Yes, sir.
Actually, in response to Ryan, and that would probably, what do you think, Chris? Probably go to Power Query and do the append first before you even bring the data set in.
Yeah, you could definitely do it there. Depending on how it is set up, you could even push it further upstream. And if you have, you can use your SQL. If you use SQL to or Python to in the initial query, build the query that way to combine and do the append. It really depends on how you have it set up, but you can definitely you do it in Power Query, do the append, and then make those changes there.
That's so fun.
Yeah, there isn't one way. Ideally, you want to push that transformation up as far stream as possible so that you can leverage your databases on-prem or if they're in the cloud, use those resources versus your resources in service before it gets there.
Yep.
Now, Power Query does do query folding, but we're not going to cover that topic today.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Row context or filter context, we just covered that. Context transition. So context transition, it occurs when row context is converted to filter context, usually when using functions like calculate. Not going to go into this, but we're going to cover a little bit, see what this looks like in action here in just a moment. All right, we had just mentioned calculate. So calculate function is a concept of its own. This is actually one of the most powerful functions in DAX. This is just something that is modifies filter context to perform dynamic complex calculations and is an absolute must to understand and in order to leverage some of those complex queries. And then time intelligence. DAX has included built-in functions like total year to date, same period last year, and dates month to date to easily create time-based comparisons. And a lot of these are going to be just your repetitive patterns and that they've built those functions to make that logic a whole lot easier to perform. And those are very, very handy to have. Okay, and then we have iterators versus aggregators. If you have some familiarity with DAX and you've heard of SUM, you may have heard about SUMX, but what's the difference? Well, with the iterators such as SUMX, average X, and filter. A filter is an iterator. It evaluates the expressions row by row, giving more control, but can impact performance. So this would be similar to the behavior of a calculated column without expanding the model. And we'll talk more about that. And then we have our aggregators, which is just your sum, your average, your max. And they work over the entire columns and are faster, but they're less flexible. And we'll explain the difference here as well once we get into Power BI Desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a moment. And we're going to shift gears, and I am going to hop into Power BI Desktop. All right. So what I'm going to do is give you a little sneak peek at the data set. Here's our model. It is going to be very simple, nothing complicated. This is more conceptual. And some of the business use cases are not going to be very applicable to the real world situation, but the concept will. We have our dim date, our dim store, dim product, and dim fact sales. Pretty much the standard out of the can data set. And then we don't have anything crazy as far as our columns go, just your standard store sales or store descriptors and your different facts or sales facts, such as your product key, promotion key, the return amount, return quantity, etc. So nothing crazy there. Okay, so one of the first things that I like to do is I want to build a measure table. Some folks like to put their measures in the different tables that they're being used in, but I like to actually bring them out into a specific table, and I'm going to create a table, and I'm going to name this my measure table. Actually, I'm going to say my measures. And I'm going to leave that table blank. And now that it is applying, you'll notice that it is going to have one column right here, my measures. Right now, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this. But you know what? If I do that, that's actually going to delete the measure column. So what I need to do first is create a measure before I do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this simple. I'm going to go ahead and go into my dim date, excuse me, and I'm going to throw in my date key. And then I'm just going to reformat that real quick for short date to make it a little bit easier to see. And then I'm going to throw in my fact sales, sales from my fact sales. And that's just going to be my, let's go with sales amount. So right now we're using implicit measures right here, where this is nothing defined. This is just drag and drop. But what I want to do is I want to actually be more specific, and I want to create a total sales or sales amount measure. So what I'm going to do is hop over here. I'm going to create this measure called total sales, and I'm just going to use sum. So what we're going to do in this one is we're going to show the difference between sum and SUMX. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my measure table and click new measure. And I have already created these measures, and I'm going to go ahead and now that I have my measure created, I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And watch what happens. Notice that the icon changed from the table icon to the measure icon. And it also brought it to the very top. And now I have just my total sales measure. So what I did was I created a measure using just sum. The goal for this is just to sum or just total the total sales amount. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it and drop it. And notice we have the exact same number. So everything's working. We're good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the implicit measure. And now we're just using measures that are explicitly saying sum the total sales amount. Nothing crazy there. So what is the difference between sum and SUMX? Well, the sum is the basic aggregator function that totals all the values. And then what SUMX does, it actually is an iterator. So it goes row by row. And what I'm going to show you right here is, let me pull up the SUMX measure, and then we're going to see what happens, what the differences are. And right here, I have my total sales of SUMX, or the name of my measure right here. And then I have my function SUMX, and then fact sales, which is the name of the table. Because with the iterators, you have to define the table first, and then you tell it what column to iterate over. And we're going to iterate over the sales amount. And then it's going to sum everything one row at a time. Now that we've got that locked in, measures created, I'm going to scoot this over so that I can see the name of the measures. And, well, they're the exact same. But wait a minute, they're different. Well, and you know what? So in this case, they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. There really isn't a reason for there to be a different number because in the end, we are summing row by row. But where would the benefit of SUMX come into play? Because SUMX is not recommended, or it's going to require more resources as far as compute. It uses a different compute engine compared to the aggregator, which is just your sum. So what's the use case for using that iterator? Well, this is what it would need, or this would be a good use case right here. Remember sum or the iterators, we take it row by row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over here into my data, and then I'm going to go into my sales amount right here. Take out the blanks. And if we have a use case where we want to find what our profit is, and we're going to define profit very simply as total cost minus the unit cost. We would need to take this column, the total cost, minus the unit cost, and then get a number. So what we have to do is we have to go row by row, take this 293.85 minus 2,644.65 and get our value. Rinse and repeat all the way down. So that's where the iterator comes in, and that's where the higher cost comes into play because there's more calculations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new measure. And now this is my profit measure. And this has to use SUMX because this is going row by row, taking back total cost and then minus it from your fact sales unit cost. And I'm going to go into here and I'm going to throw in my total cost and my unit cost. And then I'm going to throw in my profit just to validate. So using raw, just rounded ballpark numbers, that's 38.4 minus 4.5. So 38 minus 4 is about 34. So yeah, it looks like everything's working right. Now, this is something that you can do row by row when you have these different calculations. If you want to find the profit, your margin, if you want to find your net gains, these would be different use cases where you can utilize your iterators. If you just want a simple sum, average, mean, medium, use those aggregators, then you would want to use just your non-iterator functions. All right, now what I'm also going to do, and I find this very useful, is because I'm going to shift gears to the next concept, but I've got a list of my functions right here, but I want to group them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my model, and I'm going to click on all three of these. And I'm going to group them, and I'm going to name this folder as the sum versus SUMX folder, just because that's a concept we're working on. And now I've got them a little more organized. So when you're working with larger projects and you have a lot of measures, this becomes very useful. I'm going to create a new measure. And notice it does not get dumped into there because I created up here. And I'm going to create this one, and I'm actually going to cancel out of it because I want to create a new page. Actually, but before I do that, are there any questions on what I covered so far? Okay. All right. And then Rand, if there's any questions, would you mind just chiming in, since sometimes it's a little hard for that. I don't see the hand pop up on the screen share. All right. So the next one, I'm going to jump into the if and switch measures right here. When to use those and why you'd want to use those. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in the date key. For this example, we're going to keep it, again, very simple. And then I'm going to stick with the sales quantity. So where's my sale quantity? There's my sale. In this case, I don't want the sum of the sale quantity. I actually want the row by row so I can see. And then we have our date, so we're good there. Okay, so when do we use if? So a lot of our analysts are asked questions that compare one thing or has some kind of a criteria. We got to know, does our sales exceed a certain amount? Is it within certain different thresholds, within different territories, et cetera? So when do we use those comparisons? I'm going to start with if. And I'm going to create this measure right here. And this is my if measure. And we're just going to count the sale quantity. And in this case, the question we're asked is, well, with our dates, when did we have a high quantity of sales? And how do we define high quantity? Well, and we're just interested in the 250 right here. So anything greater than 250, we're going to count as high quantity. So I'm going to go ahead and take that and dump it in here. And I want you to watch what happens. I'm going to sort. We have a high quantity of 320, 260. That's my lowest number. And that's my highest number. But what happened to the ones and twos and anything below 250? Well, that's part of our filter and context transition. Since we're not evaluating anything outside of the 250, Power BI just goes ahead and removes all of those different rows. Same as like trimming the excess fat. There's no need to have those extra rows because they're just blank. They're not being used. But what if we want to know what those values are, but not within the high quantity range, but we want to bucket them into a high quantity, medium quantity, low quantity, etc. Well, that's where your switch is going to come in. An if statement is good if you have just that one comparison where you're just comparing where one value is greater than another, or if it's within certain criteria. But if you have those multiple criterias where you're evaluating different conditions based off those criterias, the switch function is going to return that whichever row meets that first criterion, which I'll explain here in just a minute. I'm going to go ahead and throw in the switch sales or the sales quantity, because our use case right now is going to be, or the question we want to answer is, what days did we have a high quantity day or a medium or low? So what was the quantity volume for that day? Now, there's no real true rhyme or reason. These are just random numbers that I just arbitrarily picked based off of what the data profile was. So the 1,000, there weren't too many, so we just listed. I'm going to list that as a high quantity day. We had a lot more of the 500. So we have our three groups right here. Actually, I'm going to take a minute, step back. So here's our switch statement right here. We have switch, and then I'm going to utilize the true value as the first argument, and that is going to be the true or false. This is going to be a Boolean type evaluation. So I'm using selected value. You have to, since we're not in a context or a row by row context, but I'll explain that. That'll have to be another session. Selected value can get a little involved on that. But we're taking our sales quantity, and if it's greater than 1,000, we're going to mark it as high quantity. And then we have a sales quantity greater than 500. You have medium quantity and so forth, 250 low quantity, and then anything else is listed as a very low quantity. So that's my else statement right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lock that in. And then I'm going to throw that in here. I want you to see what the differences are. So now here's my sales quantity. We have over 1,000, high, 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 high. So it looks like it's evaluated correctly. And then we have our medium quantity, which is all over 500. So everything's checking out. But what about those values that were below 250 from the previous one right here? Take a look at what happens here. Now notice, this is where the original subset or the subset of the data ended whenever I removed out the sales quantity, or before I added sales quantity. But now that I've added it, we're now evaluating or giving a value for that 240. And that's a very low quantity. So since there's now an evaluation occurring over it, it's going to populate those different values. But these are going to remain blank. And that's okay, because we didn't tell it and we didn't give it the else statement. And if it's not 250, then just ignore it. That's essentially what we're doing. So, all right, so that in a nutshell is the differences between switch. But there's one more thing I do want to show that I find that would be very useful. Is with the switch statement, you don't always have to use true. You can also use the value that is within the switch, or within that the values within that column. And if it matches that value, then do something. And that's what this looks like. So here I have my switch statement, and instead of true, I'm using selected value, but it's going to pick what that one value for that dim store status is. And if that one value is on, because in this case, I'm just looking for the total sales of a store that is open versus a store that is closed or has been shut down. So if that store is listed as on, then I'm going to have a total sales, or then we're going to evaluate and sum the total sales. If it is off as a value, then my total sales will sum for just those stores that are off or closed. And this is what it looks like. I'm going to have my dim store table right here, and then the status. So notice it just says off and on. And then let's take a look and see what happens when I throw in that measure. So that's going to be profit SUMX. Nope, actually it's up here, store name. Now take a look. So now we have our store name of switch, or our store name switch, that's measured. But for status of stores that are off or no longer open, they had over 3.6 million in sales, compared to stores that are open or still in business. We have 169 million sales. So this is a good way if you want to just, based off of that value, if it meets that criteria, then do whatever that second, or whatever you're trying to evaluate over. And then really quickly, I do want to show, so let's say if we're adding, you have one of those columns where there's a ton of values. If you press Shift, Alt, and the down arrow, notice it'll copy whatever that line is. So let's say we have off, on, and then I can just go in easily and just change it to left, right, up, and so forth, without having to retype all of this or having to copy and paste. So just a little keyboard shortcut, highly recommend. It is, again, if you hold Alt, Shift, and then you press the down arrow, that's when behavior will occur. And it'll just keep copying. And we'll go ahead and close that out. All right, so that's our second concept. We do have a couple more, and we're going to be running short on time. So I think we're going to conclude with the time intelligence to give some folks time to ask questions. But are there any questions on so far with the two different concepts that we covered? If I'm going too fast, I apologize. Trying to get this in as close to time allowed or allotted. So, all right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. And we're going to cover calculate. You heard calculate mentioned. And this is where the fun really begins. So with the calculate, it allows you to modify the filter context. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another table. Oh, you know what? I need to go in here and I need to group these. This is going to my switch versus if. I can spell that correctly. So now they're all grouped, nice and tidy, just good practice to get into. Be good stewards of our notebooks. You never know who's going to jump into it. Make it easier on that next analyst to take a look at it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to throw in for my date. I want my date key. There we go. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to bring over my total sales, but what I want to know is I've been asked by leadership to identify sale quantity that is over 500. Like I said, these aren't applicable to the real world situation, but we're going to keep it simple. So in this case, total sales greater than 500. One of the things you'll notice is I have my sum, which we saw earlier. Now I've wrapped it around calculate. Calculate is going to tell the engines that we're going to modify the filter context. So what we're going to do is we're going to sum the sales amount, but we don't want to just sum the sales amount. We're going to throw in that stipulation that the sales quantity has to be greater than 500. So we're going to filter out all the sales below 500 or 500 and below and sum everything above it. All right, so now that's locked in. I'm going to dump that into the table. And you'll notice that our sales have significantly dropped, but how much has it changed? Let's throw in the sales amount just to see. For comparison, oh, wait a minute. Why are these blank? Okay, the quantity was above, we wanted the quantity above 500. So let's take a look just to validate to make sure our sales quantity, and we don't want sum, is above 500. Well, what's happening there? So we have a sales quantity. You know what? I think I need to switch these two out. And there we go. All right. So now we have our proper date key. We're using the right column since we're iterating over this table, but we have our sales quantity over 500 and then sales quantity below 500. Notice there's no values. So this way you can add in different stipulations. I don't know why that's getting picked up. I need to look in to see what's happening there. So that would just, I need to do more investigation on why those values are popping up. But you can add in different criteria in here if you want to change the 500 or add more logic to have to fit your different business needs. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and move on to the next step. Well, what happened with our sales from last year? And this is where time intelligence comes in. And I'm going to add my measure for sales. And these are going to be our total sales from last year. So we have calculate because we're going to modify the filter context. And again, we're using sum, so nothing crazy there. And then we have the same period last year. So this is a very simple function that's just taking the current date and just taking that same period or same date from last year. And it can be based off of a date, a year, or even whatever that day value is or that date value is. So lock that in. And I want to sort this by date so that we can see everything working as it should. And notice we have blanks right here for total sales of last year because the data set starts at year 2007. So I'm going to scroll down and let's go to see where that first value pops up. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to go a little more granular so it's we can move a little bit quicker. All right, so my first value is on 1/1/2008. We have from last year, we had on this date 86,314